A new preprint publication of a study by Dr. Nicola Guess and colleagues reports that changing dietary carbohydrates from 30% all the way down to 10% has no effect on blood sugar control. What does this mean for the effectiveness of low-carb diets, and what might this mean for you if you're on a low-carb diet or thinking about starting a low-carb diet? I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and I think it's important to go over this study and put it into context of the other data we have about low-carb diets and blood sugar control, because it's a fascinating field with a bit of a debate about not if low-carb diets work, but how they work, right? That we have plenty of evidence showing from randomized controlled trials and non-randomized studies, like from the Virta Health Group, that ketogenic diets and even moderate low-carb diets can help with blood sugar control compared to controlled diets. But it may not be true in all cases. It's a little confusing as to, is it just a weight loss effect or is it actually a carbohydrate effect? We have evidence to suggest it's a carbohydrate effect on top of a weight loss effect. But again, the data isn't consistent. And here's where it's important to get into the details of the study. So let's talk about this study by Dr. Nicola Guess and colleagues. It's a small trial, right? It was done in Kuwait with 12 people. That's it, 12 people. They went on 6 days of different diets, depending on the amount of carbohydrates, ranging from 10% all the way up to 30% of carbohydrates. Now, this was designed to be weight neutral. So the calories that were provided were designed to keep the people steady weight. And those calories range from 1,900 to 3,700 calories. So even in the 10 to 30% carbohydrate range, the absolute grams of carbohydrates went from 48 grams at the lowest for the 1,900 calorie diet up to 142 grams. Or for the 3,700 calorie diet, it went from 93 grams at the lowest to 278 grams. Okay, so that's interesting. You know, the absolute amount, the absolute grams of carbohydrates was rarely below 50, and definitely not below 30 or 20 like the Virta Health trial, like a lot of the ketogenic trials. And to her credit, Nicola Guess did a tutorial on the study, and I recommend, if you're on Twitter, to take a look at it, where she commented in retrospect she wished she would have measured ketones and some other factors that we'll get into. They also fixed the diets at 15% protein, which is very interesting because, as you've heard a lot from us here at Diet Doctor, protein makes a difference. It makes a difference in weight loss, satiety, and blood sugar control. So maybe keeping the protein at such a low level may have hurt the study results. The other impressive factor of this trial was they provided all the food for the participants. So they cooked all the meals, they provided all the meals. Now, it wasn't in a metabolic ward, so they didn't observe them actually eating the meals. They were instructed not to eat extra food, but the meals were provided, which is a big task. Now, this was done, like I mentioned, in Kuwait, and apparently they did try to serve culturally appropriate foods, which means, I think, figs and dates, and probably some bread and some processed carbs. On Twitter, Dr. Guess did acknowledge that some of the carbs, or many of the carbs, were refined and processed to be culturally appropriate. So that may affect things as well. But the bottom line is there was no difference in blood sugar, either fasting, average blood sugar, or postprandial blood sugars from the 10% carbs to the 30% carbs. So how do we interpret this? Do we say carb reduction has no impact on blood sugar control and therefore we should just forget about it? Or are there more nuances here? And clearly, I think there are more nuances here, as Dr. Guess acknowledges in her tutorial and in the paper. So one interesting thing is putting this in context of the literature. If you look at studies that look at people with 60% carbohydrate in their diet and reducing it down to 35%, there's a good study showing that improves blood sugar control, and certainly lowering it even more from such a high level significantly improves blood sugar control. So since the highest percentage was 30, maybe the difference between 30 and 10 wasn't robust enough in this small sample size to see a difference. Also, when you're talking about amount of carbs that are already well below the standard American diet, right? We're not talking about the 50, 60% of the standard American diet. It was 30% at most. So when you're talking about that degree of carbs, quality of carbs matters. I mean, quality of carbs always matters, but definitely matters here as well. So I didn't see an actual breakdown of what the food supplied was. But it sounds like it was bread, it was refined carbs, and high sugar fruits, and that can make a difference. I'd like to see that compared to above ground vegetables and low sugar fruits like berries. Now, Dr. Guess also on Twitter, we have to be aware of what people can afford and what they enjoy, right? Because if you give them the healthiest diet in the world, but they don't enjoy it or they can't afford it, they're not going to stick to it. So that's a very good point by Dr. Guess. But if you're talking about the physiology or why low carb diets work, then the type of carbs actually are going to make a difference there. The next point is the role of protein. Protein was fixed at 15%, which is pretty low level. If you go back and look at the 30 or so randomized controlled trials that looked at low carb versus higher carb, and those that showed benefits to low carb diets, the majority of them also raised at least the percentage, if not the absolute amount, of protein in the diet. So there is this double effect of lowering carbs and raising protein that really is probably the most effective that was not studied in this particular trial. And the other point is sugar. Even though they reduced the carbs, the sugar content was still fairly high in the carbs, which can also impact the results. And lastly, you have to ask, was 6 days enough of a time to see a difference with such a small change in such a small number of people? Now, that's where Dr. Guess acknowledged that she wished she would have measured insulin levels, which I think is great because you likely can see a change in insulin levels before you see a change in blood sugar as well. So that would have been interesting information. But kudos to them for using CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, to get continuous readings. So it's not just a spot check of a fasting glucose or one postprandial, but they get the course of glucose throughout the entire day. So in summary, I think this is a very well-run study. But again, when you're talking about a randomized controlled trial that is well-run and well-designed, you have to work within the confines of that trial, right? 10% to 30% carbs with the type of carbs they used, which was high sugar and high refined carbohydrates, compared to most low-carb studies that focus on green leafy vegetables, above ground vegetables, and low sugar fruits. So there is that difference there. Also the fixed protein, which was relatively low, the short time frame. So definitely some limitations to the study, but very interesting to show that maybe you're going to get your biggest bang from the buck going from 50 or 60% carbs down to 30 or 20% carbs. When you're already at 30% and you want to see a meaningful difference to reduce your carbs, you either need to reduce them much more down to the ketogenic level of maybe 5% or less than 30 grams per day, or you really need to focus on the quality of the carbs, or you also need to increase your protein. And I think that's one of the key things. And actually, Dr. Guess has hinted that we're going to hear more about that from her and her colleagues, that she has a study in the works focusing on protein and blood sugar control, which I think is going to be really interesting. And that's why here at Diet Doctor, we really have been focusing lately on putting out more content and providing more resources for higher protein, because it seems the combination of lowering carbs and raising protein is really where the sweet spot is for weight loss, body composition, and blood sugar control. And again, of course, it brings me to a point that I've made time and time again. Does it matter why low carb diets work, or does it just matter that they work? And for many people, individuals looking to improve their health, looking to lose weight, improve their blood sugar, maybe why they work doesn't matter so much as if they are a diet that you can stick to, that you enjoy, that helps reduce your hunger, improve your satiety, help you feel good, and improves all your metabolic health markers. The why might not matter so much. You can find more resources on low-carb diets, higher protein diets, recipes, meal plans, evidence-based guides at dietdoctor.com. If this video was helpful, please click the thumbs up and the subscribe button below, and that way you'll get all the updates from us here at Diet Doctor News on YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody.